This is the Enragé, a show where we take a deeper dive into written works published at the Center for a Stateless Society. Join us as we give voice to the ideas challenging the vain phantoms that haunt our social reality and stand in the way of total liberation. For more information, visit c4ss.org. And to support this show or any of the other projects happening at the center, please visit patreon.com/c4ss.org. Thank you for listening.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the 18th installment of the Enragé. This is your host, Eric Fleischman, and today we'll be joined by Frank Miroslav to discuss his article, Why Collective Action Problems Are Not a Capitalist Plot, on the non-triviality of going from individual to collective rationality. Frank Miroslav is an Australia-based anarchist. Frank, thanks for coming on the Enragé.
Yeah. Hey, happy to be here.
Happy to have you. How you doing?
So I am currently recording this. So I'm Australian, but I'm currently recording this from San Francisco. I flew across the Pacific Ocean to be with my wonderful girlfriend, Michaela. It is the first time that we have met in person, and it is delightful. But unfortunately, it's just been a whole thing. This is the first time I've gone overseas as an adult by myself. And it's like the first relationship I've been in a while. It's just like, it's a lot. So I'm like less on point than usual. But you know, I'm fucking happy to be here.
No, it's really great to have you, and thank you for coming along, even though you're probably jet lagged. And
I'm sure there's like at least one of your listeners who's also in San Francisco, or like like around the Bay Area or something, who'd like to meet me. But unfortunately, by the time this releases, I will not be here anymore. But I really, really, really want to come back to America, and next time I will be more like public about me being here. So, sorry, but yeah.
No, well, fantastic. I hope that folks can run into you next time you're back in the States.
Mm-hmm.
So to start things off, can you please give our listeners a brief overview of your piece and the reasons for writing it?
Yeah. So my piece is basically a summary of it's a bunch of things, but like what really motivated it was there's this subdiscipline of sub-area of economics called public choice theory, which is basically the application of like economic reasoning to like political decision making. And so one of like the key texts in the public choice tradition is Mancor Olson's The Logic of Collective Action, which is it's like a really short book. It's quite good. Anyway, he touches on like a bunch of different theories of like collective action, how they relate to society, and one of them he touches on is Marxism, and he like offers just like a really like simple yet like pretty profound critique that like I really don't see talked about that much, and I feel like it's like one of these things where like if you accept it to be true, it really like makes the premises of Marxism to be like pretty like, I mean, it doesn't completely invalidate Marxism, but like it like means that like, okay, like you're gonna have to like, this is not like something that you can just brush off. This is like something you have to take quite seriously. And like I don't talk about that because unfortunately public choice theory, which is like like a lot of its like originators were like really libertarian types, and unfortunately outside of the very enlightened folk around the C4SS and like left market anarchism in general, anything that touches libertarianism is just like just so obviously like capitalist like propaganda or like apologetics, and there's absolutely nothing of value that could ever come from it, which is why I don't mention it. But like it's just like a really like just like it's like, yeah, this is like a really fundamental problem, and I'm like I'm not saying it does. I don't think it like it doesn't like it's not like a complete knockdown argument against Marxism that are probably counter arguments, but it's like a very like it's like, yeah, like you guys really have to like deal with this. And so, to give a brief summary of like what the argument is, like it's basically that, class struggle has like a free rider problem, right? So, like, Mankar Olson points this out in Logic of Collective Action. It's like, okay, yeah, like, let's grant the Marxist premise that like, it is in the workers' self-interest to like, go like try and overthrow capitalism. But like, just because it's in their interest doesn't mean they'll do it. If I'm like self-interested and like I would, I don't know, bringing about communism would make my life significantly better. Like, it's also in the interest of like a lot of other people to do that. So like I can kind of just let them do it. Like, I don't have to risk myself. And then like, yeah. So, and then like, if everyone thinks like that, then of course, revolution is never going to happen, or if it does happen, it's because like things are so bad that like there's no alternatives but revolution. And like that general point of like not just like the free rider problem, but also just like getting people to come together and cohere, I think is like something that like I think just like Marxism and like unfortunately the left, and that includes like anarchists, like do not appreciate enough. One of the examples I use is like, I remember, it's from like, basically like game theory. Like I remember, reading some like game theory text, and like the very first example they use, or like one of the very first examples they use is just like a simple like model of revolution where, if like a certain number of people like commit to revolution, then, like they overthrow society and everyone benefits. And if like, a number below that threshold don't commit, then everyone who commits like is thrown in jail or executed or whatever, and everyone else is like they're left like where they were. It's obviously a very simple model. Things are far more complicated, but like something like that, I think is like a really good way to like it's a really good way to be like, hey, like just because you have like these like you can like be like, hey, like these are these incentives, and like it like seems to be pointing towards this radical overthrow of the system. You be like, no, like like hey, so like the problem of like, even if you assume that like people aren't self-interested, like there's still the problem of like, okay, but like I don't want to commit to something that's really dangerous, even if I'm like even if I like see, even if like I identify as like part of this large collective, and I like want to I'm like willing to like really sacrifice for it, because like you can be like the most like true believer in like the wonderful world that exists beyond whatever type of revolution you want. But if like you don't think enough people also commit to that, like you're just gonna be like the guy like standing in the street or whatever, and like you're gonna at best look like an idiot, and at worst you're gonna get crushed, and your life is gonna be made much worse if you're straight up killed. And like stuff like that, I feel like it's just like it's really, really obvious. And there's like I think there's like there's obviously like Marxist texts that sort of talk about this, but like it is rarely engaged with in just like such like explicit terms. And like I think this has like really, 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 really important and essential, like basically like strategic implications. And there's like a whole bunch of other stuff like this that like I think like the question of like collective action is like just like really fundamental and really interesting, and like it's kind of like ironic, and it's like it's ironic because like on one hand I'm like making such a big deal out of it, but on the other hand like this is like kind of like what so much like left theorizing is talking about, and yet like at the same time like they rarely ever just like get to like brass tacks, because most leftists have inherited like this really like clunky way of talking about things that like kind of obscures what's going on. And I can get into that later, but yeah, that was my motivation for writing it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great summary. I'm really interested to have this interview. I read your piece when it first came out, and I'm kind of a Marx guy at the center, and I thought it was really good. I thought it was really profound. I agree totally that it's just something that's not addressed enough in discussing Marxism. There's lots of great critiques that come from non-leftists that are often dismissed, and I feel like the center does a great job, and folks at the center do a great job of taking them seriously.
Yeah, like I feel like what I really am like, I've got like, you know, a bunch of things that I'd like to, you know, I got into, so for some context, like part of why I wrote this is like I'm like currently in the process of recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome. And my past like 5 years or so were like really rough for me, and it's only like the past year that I've really started to get better, which is, you know, why I can do things like fly to America from Australia. And like I just read a lot of stuff in that time, and I'm like at this point where I'm like, God, like I really feel like there's just so much value to be had in like just like discarding, or like at the very least like, you know, like trying to like just like, I don't know, like modernize, but like I feel like there's just ways to like express what, like, you know, even like, you know, really ambitious or great like thinkers were saying, just like so much more clearly and cleanly using like these modern like analytical tools. And like so like most people, right, when they like, you know, get into like the crazy world of like online radical politics or whatever, like, or, you know, like even just radical politics in general, like, you know, they'll like join like an organization or something physical, or like, you know, they'll like become part of like, you know, this like group online, and they're like, but like either way, like, you know, you're like, for understandable reasons, right, you're like encouraged to like, you know, read within like a very like particular, like you're given like a very particular canon to engage with, and, you know, like some of that is just like, you know, like, okay, like, you know, you want to like affect the world, like you can't just spend all your time reading, you actually have to do stuff. And also, you know, like, there's just like a lot of shit out there, and like, you know, like having like this like there's like not anything wrong in like, you know, just being like, hey, like, you know, this is all you need, like to understand, like there's nothing in principle wrong with that. What's wrong with it, of course, is like, you know, if like you were given like shitty models of the world, and also, you know, you're like strongly encouraged from like trying to like you know, like evaluate them or like improve upon them, or, you know, be rigorous with them. And so like I really do feel, and like this is something I feel very awkward in saying, because, you know, it's like you know, there's a lot of like charlatans, right, on the internet, and like, you know, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, you know, like I have this like grand thing that I figured out that, you know, like is going to change the world forever, and really all they want is, you know, just to get like, you know, sycophants or whatever, or groupies who like, you know, flatter them. Yeah. I like I like to think I'm like trying to like avoid that. But also I do think that like there is just like really like a lot of low hanging fruit that can be that can be like picked by either like grabbing, just like, you know, meshing things together that like haven't really been meshed together before, or just like, you know, doing the basic like really like a really like simple but like essential like part of like any proper quote unquote science, that where like, you know, you're like, okay, like, you know, we've got like this fucking messy ass model, like let's try and like compress it and like compactify it, and like try and like and make it like easy to understand, and like, you know, not necessarily like you're not necessarily like creating new knowledge, but what you're doing is like you're creating something that's like easier to engage with, and like easier to understand, and like easier to employ. So yeah.
No, I think that the center is in particular a great space for that kind of, I suppose I'd call it intellectual diversity, but like willingness to engage through combining ideas, you know, like Austrian economics, Marxist political economy, that otherwise would not normally be connected. And you get some really interesting and important insights from all of that. But
yeah. It's sorry. I just because this is like important. It's not just like the like connection of different stuff is important, but it's also like it's about destruction as much as it is about creation, right? Like I think also a really important part of it is just being like, look, this whole thing, like a big chunks of it are just like not fit for purpose, and like we really should just let them go. Yeah.
Well, it reminds me of the Bakunin quote, the Bakunin quote. The destructive urge is a creative one,
Yeah, because like, sorry, this is like
no, we can.
Yeah, I go on tangents. If you've ever listened to my podcast, I go on tangents.
Go.
It's delightful, or it's annoying. But no, I really do think there's like a lot of value, right, in like, like really just like compressing and like not and when I say compression, like I don't mean like like hacking out stuff, like abridging stuff and like hacking out like things that you think is unnecessary, but it's actually like, really important. What I mean by that is just like giving people like models of the world that like require less like you don't have to describe as much like less like descriptively shorter descriptively, right? So like they're just like shorter or like they're easy to understand, but in terms of like explanatory power, they're still just as strong, if not as stronger as like the more like bloated model, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like I don't know, like a maybe example of this is like like I don't know, like a good as someone who's into Marx, you probably like know this, like a good like explainer of like Das Kapital, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you shouldn't have to read like all like 3 or 4 volumes of that to like understand what the hell Marx was talking about, right? Like
yeah.
You should be able to get like a good explainer, right? And of course like every like Marxist then is like every single explainer but mine is incorrect and is actually like revisionist and is bourgeois ideology or whatever. But whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's jump into, you've given a really great overview of everything, but let's jump into some like down to the basics questions to really get at the core of your piece.
Yeah.
Could you just give the audience a definition and maybe some brief examples of what collective action problems are and what is collective rationality versus individual rationality?
Yeah, so like a collective action problem, actually I should have like, there's like a proper definition to this, but in my mind it's just like getting people to all like do things in like a certain way that you get like a result that is like more than the sum of its parts, and like a collective outcome that is like better than I feel like like there's something about like it's about like it's like because it's not like a collective action like doesn't need to be for like the benefit of a collective, like something like I don't know, like fucking like slave labor or something is like technically a form. Yeah, it's like a form of collective action that like benefits, like doesn't really benefit like the slaves, but benefits like the masters and I guess like the people they sell to maybe and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just like people working together in concert and like achieving some result. And then like so like there's like I feel like there's like a lot of like collective action that's like towards like very like negative ends or like very like the ends of like only like a few people, but like the collective action that I feel like is really important and that we should like care about is like collective action that's like pro-social and like helps like lots of people or like ideally everyone, and that is like that is very aspirational, but it's also hard in ways that I think people don't appreciate. And I think political discourse, like even among like online widows, would be greatly improved by just like an appreciation of the difficulties of collective action. And a great way to demonstrate why it's hard is like individual versus collective rationality. And this is like tricky. Collective rationality is tricky. Okay, so in my piece, the collective action problems of a capitalist plot, I was mainly using it to refer to like basically like Marxist assumptions about like class interest and like class rationality, right? So like, there's like this whole thing about like, oh, like class consciousness and the fact that, people don't have it is like such a problem. And like, if you were acting in like, if you as an individual, like acting in like, whether consciously or unconsciously in a way that like furthers the end of your class, like that at scale, I think would be like an example of collective rationality. But also another like thing about collective rationality is like, and this is, and actually I think in retrospect I could have been more nuanced about this, but like I feel like what happens with collective rationality, and we'll get into this because this has to do with stuff like the economic calculation problem, is like, you're like, okay, cool, we want a collective action, so we think there's a collective actor called like the proletariat, who like, have these class interests, and that means that they will, fight capitalism. Okay, great. Well, working people don't seem like, they're like occasionally fighting their bosses or whatever. But like, it's not like this sort of like really coherent, like organized stuff. All right, cool. That sucks. Let's go, form a political party and we can like coordinate them. And then like, that is an example of like an attempt at collective rationality. But like, because, of course, like your socialist party is not run by like some, purely objective, like, algorithm that's like, I don't even know like what it would entail to like properly lead a socialist party, but the fact that it is not run by that but by people means that it's like it's like pretending to be like collectively rational, but of course in actuality it is like a lot of it is driven by, if not all of it is driven by like the individual rationality of like the people in charge, and like that results in outcomes that like are not like that socialists like ostensibly do not want in a bunch of ways. And the reason why is it really comes down to like individuals have like these like pretty sharp limits. It's not just individuals, like there are pretty sharp limits on like what we can know about the world. And yeah, like that's very like computer sciencey, which is like ultimately I think a direction that I think like a direction that anarchism should really go towards, because it really like it really lets you like definitively say things. But yeah, like in like a more practical, like just like everyday human sense, like it's just like very hard for like an individual to be like, okay, like let me try and grasp like the full range of concerns that like even like if you're like, okay, like fucking like dealing with millions of people is just too much, let's just like we'll just like simplify them, and like everyone in like the like industry of like I don't know, like shoemaking or something has like these interests and stuff like that. You've still got like, okay, like what are those interests, and then like how do they conflict with like the interests of other people, and like that's very hard. And so like what individuals do is they just like they make consciously or unconsciously they make like trade-offs and compromises between them, and that's just like that's like unavoidable. Like you can't not do that, because if you don't do that, like you're basically just like a fucking vegetable. You would just like collapse and not be able to do anything. And then of course there's also like the problem of communication. So like like you only have like you can only take in so much information, and like and then there's also like even more problems, like like how do you know the information you're taking in is accurate, like all this other stuff. And so like those two things, like processing and like information like coming into you, like there are like like really hard like physical limits that can be found in computer science, but like also, like everyone has experienced, just feeling like overwhelmed, because of like, making like hard decisions and trade-offs, or like because, there's just like too much like information and like, input and stimulus in the environment coming at you. I'm pretty sure like everyone has, experienced like both of those. And so like what that means is you have to cut them down, and that means you have like, you can't ever have like, a God's eye view where you're like, okay, like, I have my algorithm for like how to lead the working class to defeat capitalism. It's like very objective. Let's go execute it. You're making these decisions within a context, and like that the fact that you're like cutting away stuff, or like you're unable to consider like the full range of possibilities, means that you're gonna miss stuff, and like that's like a really big deal. And that is like that has really, really big implications for Marxism, I think. I hope that answers your question.
No, you totally did. And in the last couple of questions I've asked, you've done a really good job of outlining your piece and your specific critiques of Marxism and the Marxist model. So, and you even go as far in your piece as to say that it's rational because of the failure of Marxist predictions about the end of capitalism. You just ignore the model entirely.
Sorry, not quite. So like, I mean that's part of it. I think like, if you like, I posted on Twitter like a week or so ago, about, Karl Kautsky's, The Class Struggle, which very few people have read, but like back in the day was like, it was the most popular Marxist tract. It's like, I don't know, like State and Revolution is nowadays. And like, if like you knew about Marxism, it was probably through this book. And like, like one of the things he says is like, oh yeah, like proletariat is just like growing in number, and like people are getting more and more immiserated. And so like, social revolution is inevitable. And like, it might come peacefully, it might not, but like, we're basically going to win. So don't worry about it. And like that clearly hasn't fucking happened. And so, like, and of course, people are like, oh, like Kautsky, he was a revisionist, blah, blah, blah. But like, there's like a lot of like failed predictions. But also the other thing is like, it's also, you can still like not want to it can still be rational for you not to want to fight for like radical social change if you just think like, the collapse is like sufficiently far away that it doesn't matter. Like, Marxists, they've got this thing like the falling rate of profit, eventually it'll hit zero, and then like, shit's like really gonna hit the fan. But like, like there's like, like the heat death of the universe is, couple hundred, oh god, I actually don't know off the top of my head. I'm a very bad transhumanist. Sorry. It's a while away. But the fact that, like eventually, like, all the unless like, we do some major fucking like stellar engineering, like all the galaxies of the universe are like going to be too far apart for them to ever communicate. Like that's like a thing. And like, like we should take it into consideration, if you want to do things like seed the universe with whatever, but like, like that isn't like relevant to like political struggle in the moment, right? Like something can be like gonna happen, but it might be so far away that like it just doesn't matter, right? So yeah, like it's just I don't know, it's just kind of wild that like it's kind of wild that like, again, like like what really gets me about this, right, is like there are some incredibly fucking smart leftists in like the last century. Like they're not dumb people, right? And yet, like, I don't know, maybe these arguments are out there, but like, I've like read like quite a bit of like the history of like, ideas and movements, and like, I just like don't find these sort of objections raised, and they seem pretty obvious to me, and yet, they're not. And yeah, that to me is like the really concerning part, and why like, I really treasure what I really treasure what C4SS does, and I'm very happy to be a part of it, because like, like it's a place where you can actually raise these objections, it seems. So yeah.
Well, I didn't mean to misrepresent your position at all about ignoring the Marxist model.
Yeah.
More, you give a more nuanced thing. You raise very, very legitimate concerns about the fact that predictions about the end of capitalism, the falling rate of profit, and that these things have not come to pass, and so there's a very good reason to question them. But in your opinion, is there any redemption for the actual Marxist model and its real world application? Because you do admit that in your piece, you use a simplified Marxist model, and Marx is beloved to me, so I'm going to push back a little bit. I'm just curious about what you think about it. Additionally, not to make the question too long and rambly, but do you think that Marxists are correct in their core idea that social change revolves primarily around the means of production? Or do you think that a different mode of analysis, just totally separate from the Marxist fundamentals and the model and the analysis, is due for?
So do I think Marxism is beyond redemption? I think that Marxists, there's quite a few of them. So there's quite a few of them who are good people. I particularly like the people around the Emancipation Network. There are a bunch of podcasts, and they're quite rigorous, and that even though whatever disagreements I may have with them, I think they're asking the right questions and inquiring in the right places, and so I think that's really good. I think that I think there's a bunch of Marxist historians who whatever, I don't care about your politics. You've done just legitimately good historical work, looking at things, and that's great. I think the problem with this is I think the problem with Marxism is it is tied to a specific set of scientific, in the sense that is because there's that whole fucking positivist debate that I don't quite know exactly what happened, but people like Karl Popper were Marxism isn't a science because it's unfalsifiable, and I don't think that's true. I think one thing I'm really influenced by is William Gillis' stuff on science, which he gets from Richard Ward, I think. Well, no, he uses Richard Ward as an exemplar, and it's not falsification is nice, but it's more about getting better models that better capture reality, and even if you can't actually falsify it, you can still, there's still ways to approach things and get more rigorous models. And I think the problem with Marxism is it's this kind of sleight of hand, where on one hand it's oh no, we're just being scientific rationalist, bro, but on the other hand, you're making normative, there's implicit normative claims throughout this, and the fact that Marxism is it's this very annoying thing where it's resting it's got its normative claims that rest on a bunch of descriptive claims about the world, and but because it can't admit that, it's in this weird position where on one hand value is really important, but you don't want to admit that that you have these values for whatever reason, and so you're clinging to this model because it is what provides you values, and well, I'm not saying it's not you, but the vibe I get is you don't want to break from it because if you don't have these, then what do you have? And so I feel I feel to redeem Marxism would be to basically basically a redeemed Marxism would basically you'd be an anarchist who you're basically all right, cool, anarchist values are pretty dope, and then you're just gonna focus on class struggle stuff, and that's gonna be your priority. I feel like that's what a redeemed version of Marxism would look like, just because I think that the collect like the problem of collective action, like just it makes the like predictions just like really suspect, and like maybe there's a way to salvage it, like like my shit hasn't been like like quote unquote peer reviewed via the online process of people shit talking like Twitter, so maybe there's a way to salvage it, but like once you take away like the prediction of like immiseration and like class struggle and revolution from Marxism, like I really just don't see what you have like beyond so like beyond just like being like, oh yeah, like I just like I think class is important, which it is, and you're like concerned about it, and then like you have like these values, and like yeah, like I'm motivated by these values, in which case like yeah, like I mean I am like of the opinion that like the best of the left like once it if it is like coherent and fleshed out and like rigorous, in terms of values, that is, I think just like looks like anarchism. And so at that point, like yeah, like you're an anarchist, Harry, as the I picture, when I said that, I pictured like Kropotkin looking like Hagrid. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Well, I'll tell you that I'm definitely in the business of trying to redeem Marxism,
Okay.
but I definitely agree with you that there is a rationalism and scientism kind of problem in Marxism.
Yeah.
I would ask again, because I think what you're saying about stripping away some of the normative claims and some of the like the ideas about like vanguard or mass revolution. I think when you strip a lot of things away, Marxism is the idea that social change revolves around the means of production. Do you think,
okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, do you think that's an accurate assessment of reality, or do you take a different?
I would say, sorry, I'm just moving around, by the way. I would say actually the not the means of production. I would say like history is like this really grand and messy and delightful and horrifying like struggle between like different, I don't even know, I'm still thinking through this, but I think like orientations towards technology, maybe, and not just like physical technology. I think like also like a great big part of it is like social technology and like how we relate to each other, and like even things like like the categories we use to like understand the categories we use to like make sense of each other, and like how we like understand each other, like things as fundamental as that. So like yeah, I guess like I don't know, this is probably beyond my pay grade as as an internet intellectual. A couple months ago I would have said pseudo-intellectual, but like now I'm like I have advanced and I've become more self-confident. Yeah, like so I feel like okay, that's like a really big and deep question, and I think it's definitely one worth exploring. And I think like the people around C4SS like are actually unintentionally done quite a bit of good work on like like figuring this stuff out, and I'm just delighted to have like stumbled across you guys, and again I really like the place, but I think one thing that one like really one problem I have with Marxism in this regard is one like problem that I see, and maybe you tell me if I'm wrong about this, but like I feel like with one thing I really don't like about Marxism is how it like tries to cut up history into like histories and societies into like really like discrete like phases of like like once upon a time you had feudalism, and then you had this revolution, and now you have capitalism, and like I think that's like one that's just like strategically that's like strategically bad, and like I feel like I feel like, there's like this very like legitimate, like this is like something that I think like, like this is like the kernel of truth to like conservatives who are like, oh, like why don't you just like start a cooperative or something? And like, of course you respond like, oh, like there's like no way they would like ever be able to compete. And, they'd have to like sacrifice their egalitarian values to like, do the thing. Although, if you look at the actual data, like cooperatives actually like can in certain places like do actually quite well. But like I feel like the lack of prefiguration is like something that like really, really fucking hurt. Even the like it's just like really like some Marxist inspired some movements that Marxists played like quite important roles in. I feel like they were really hurt by the lack of prefiguration, and like part of that is like you start prefiguring things, and then like suddenly you figure out that, oh shit, like maybe we're wrong about this, and like we're gonna have to change. And like that is uncomfortable. Just because being wrong about stuff sucks. But also like if you create like if you got like this party of people, and like you have like status accorded to like people who can like cite books or like do like analysis based on like theory. If you happen to like stumble across something that like invalidates that, they risk like losing standing. And so like I feel like I think it's like really obvious that like it's very hard to like do like quote unquote science and like a social movement at the same time. There's just like a lot of incentives that like encourage people towards like treating knowledge and understanding in like really instrumental ways that can get quite ugly. And there's obviously ways around that, but so my point was more just like I feel like really trying to like divide history up into like discrete parts is I think it's just like wrong. But even when like it's like sort of descriptively accurate, like I always like even then I get like sort of touchy, and like I really and I'll leave it at that, and then we can. There's like somewhere I want to go, but I want to get your response to that before.
Yeah, I mean, I completely, at least if not completely, mostly agree with you. I actually wrote myself a piece on historical materialism, and in it I criticized the sort of distinct epoch view of history, and talk about how like if we're going to take the means of production as being the primary force that drives history, we need to see it as more fluid and chaotic and less distinct, and that we can use that to start talking about prefigurative politics and prefigurative cooperatives around like reorganizing the means of production here and now, not waiting for some after the revolution moment.
And like so that I think is really important, and I think so the reason I called my piece like collective action problems and other capitalist plot is like I feel like I don't know. So like one example of this is like there was like some like fucking I can't remember how I stumbled across it, but like I was just listening to like this talk by Zizek, and he was like talking about how like like fucking like the fact that like like sustainability, like the fact that like capitalists firms like trying to market themselves as sustainable, and like and it's not just like marketing themselves, like actually changing practices to like be more sustainable. He's like, oh, this is actually like part of capitalist ideology, and it's like to make you like feel good about yourself, or like to relieve the burden of like guilt, because if you had that, then you'd go out and you'd like try and change things. And I was like, dude, like maybe have you ever thought about the fact? Well, no, I'm sure he has. Like I don't know, like Zizek, like, sometimes, I mean, he's like an example of the sort of like bad public intellectual who's just like, I have to come up with like hot takes to make people interested in me because like that's all, you know, I've got, which is a failure mode I desperately want to avoid. But like, you know, there's like more like subtle and like less stupid versions of that argument that I still think are like kind of silly. You know, there's like Mark Fisher's capitalist realism, for example, was on my mind when I was writing this. And you know, he's like, oh, you know, like this capitalism is like this all-pervasive system, and like you can't even think outside of it, and it's like just so oppressive, and like, you know, we don't know what to do. And like, you know, I'm not going to deny like oppression exists, and like, you know, in some respects is definitely getting worse, but like, you know, I just think like this like really totalizing like view of the world, and also like one that, you know, like romanticizes like the good old days, you know, when we had a workers movement that was fighting for something, is like really, really fucking toxic. Both because like it just like, you know, it just like locks you into like this like state of depression where like, you know, you can't really do anything because, you know, the only thing that can change the world is like collective actors, and like those aren't on the scene, and if those aren't on the scene, well, you just gotta wait around for them to show up so you can start doing shit. And like, but also it's like, it also like is dangerous because like it ignores just like how fucking messy and weird, like, you know, the fucking like height of like radical social democracy was. And like, you know, like they you know, it was also like a fucking mess back then, even at its most radical. And like, you know, rather than like being like, all right, we gotta just like wait around for, you know, this like perfect collective actor to arise that, you know, has like we've never seen it in history, even like, you know, at like the best of like left movements, you know, like the times and places that people look back to and they're like, holy fucking shit, I wish I was there rather than here because everything is so awful. You know, like rather than that, like, you know, maybe we should, you know, like actually try and be like empirical, or like, you know, maybe look at the theoretical reasons why like this isn't happening. And yeah, that sort of stuff was really what motivated me. And also like it just like tends toward, because like, you know, if you're like, okay, we need our collective actor and like it isn't appearing, like you tend towards like a conspiratorial position, right? Where you're like, okay, like, you know, like fucking like the capitalist neoliberal demons or whatever, or like, you know, like subverting us with, you know, like trickery and bad stuff. And like, you know, I'm not going to deny, like I say in the piece, like, you know, in fact, let me just check. I open it with like, you know, yeah, propaganda and has an effect, there's co-optation of movements, there's like all these things. Yeah, absolutely. No fucking objections there. But I think what they ignore is just like, it is hard for that sort of thing to like, even something that like sort of looks like it when you squint, it's hard for even that to arise and persist. And like, you know, rather than like pinning all our hopes on this thing that, you know, I think I have pretty good reasons to suspect are like legitimately like computationally intractable, like, you know, like fucking like in like the crazy, you know, hypothetical where, you know, like the workers movement suddenly had access to like some like quantum supercomputer to like guide its approach, like still wouldn't be able to do it right. Like rather than pinning our hopes on that, maybe we should try and, you know, like reassess some things.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, hot takes about Fisher and Zizek aside, I would say that, you know, pushing forward in, you know, radically questioning the idea of capitalist hegemony and what capitalist hegemony means is a very important and effective project going forward. Because I would agree to a degree that, you know, seeing capitalism as one homogenous, you know, omnipresent thing is not a great way of understanding the complex multitude of relationships that make up what capitalism is and make it possible to disrupt those things. So I
Yeah,
think
and also
that's
like
an interesting point.
it's also just good to like not think that like the only thing that can motivate people is like their suffering, and also that just seeing like everything is just going to get worse forever. Like, you know, like again, like I happily acknowledge that like the world is fucked up in a bunch of ways, but like, you know, we have also made progress on things, and I think like that is also good. Like it, like, you know, there's like this fucking, oh god, there's this like fucking tendency sometimes to be like, oh, you know, like, oh, you think that like, you know, like fucking segregation going away is good. Oh no, man, that's just like fucking like capitalist next level mind games. Like you're just a sucker, or like, you know, like, or even like things like God, like, and this actually relates to the technology stuff. Like, you know, like things like the fact that we have like normalized like strong encryption in a bunch of ways to the point where like, you know, certain messaging apps like, you know, just have like peer-to-peer encryption enabled by default, and like, you know, if the like FBI or whatever like goes to you know, goes to their servers, they're like, all right, yep, you can have all our data, but like, you know, good luck cracking it. Like stuff like that is like a really big deal, and you know, if you don't recognize like part of what I was trying to get at in my collective action piece is like, you know, the fucking capitalists and like rest of the ruling class, like they face their own set of collective action problems, and like the left is really really bad at, well, they like sort of occasionally will recognize them, and also like I think it's kind of funny, like I think like, you know, people who just like kind of like are like, yeah, like shit sucks, I'm gonna like, you know, try and make things better by like, you know, fighting whatever power structure. I feel like a lot of times, you know, they will just like naturally stumble upon like exploiting these collective action difficulties that the you know, people in power face, because like, you know, it's just something that works, and like they want to like win, and so they just like pick it up. But like, you know, left like, you know, like the proper supposedly like serious theoretical stuff is like doesn't really like, it really looks at like, okay, like what like, yeah, okay, like, you know, we won't have like our like awesome collective actor like run by a, you know, quantum supercomputer. Like what are the collective action problems that, you know, the elites face that, you know, they can't also solve? And yeah, like that sort of stuff is like really really important.
Absolutely. So you have another piece in the works right now that talks about Marxism. It's titled "A Brief Sketch of the Fundamental Differences Between Anarchist and Marxist Economics, or Why There Are Very Good Reasons to Think Left Unity is a Very Silly Idea." I had a chance to briefly look it over. Would you mind giving an outline of this piece and how it relates to your collective action piece?
Yeah, so basically what it is I think there are very good reasons to think that like assumptions around collective action problems and like their solvability like can be, there's a pretty good argument, and I'm going to try and make it. So, you know, once I have it published, you can tell me how good it is. But I think there's a pretty good argument to be made that like the differences in assumptions, and I think it ultimately comes out of like the anarchist analysis of like power and domination, and like the basically just the downsides to that. There are good reasons to think that like this hashes out into like, you know, really like distinct economic analyses that like in turn imply both like pretty significant strategic differences, and then also pretty significant like normative differences in terms of what we would want an economy post-capitalism to look like. And my hot take is that if you like flesh this out, there's like a pretty good argument to be made that like a coherent Marxist and a coherent anarchist economics should think that the other one is either like naively supporting capitalism or is just flat out capitalist. That's my hot take.
That's a very hot take. It's a very hot take. I definitely come to different conclusions than you do. I'm big on trying to reach over the gap between anarchist and Marxist and economics, and I'm sort of a left Unitarian in many ways. But I do think.
I mean, sorry. Let me just I feel like in my piece I'm also like, I think this makes left unity silly, but like, that does not mean that, like we can't like talk to each other or cooperate. I think that just like being like, okay, here's like where I'm at, here's where you are, here's where you're at, like, we can like, the fact that we know where like each of us stand means that like, I think that makes actually for more productive conversations and cooperation, because like, it's not like, there's like, this like sort of like part of why I wrote this is like, I've noticed like, pretty smart people who are like both anarchists and Marxists be like, they never outright say it, but they basically imply, oh yeah, like, like anarchism and Marxism, like, like, yeah, okay, we differ on a bunch of stuff, but at the end of the day, like, we're both on the same thing, right? And I'm like, no, I think actually, like, the Marxist assumptions around like, what capitalism does to technology, and like also the Marxist critique of like market relations, I think like that implies a economic setup that is like pretty significantly different from what I see as like and again, like part of this is, it is going to be like, there's like a bunch of like hot takes in this, like, one of the things I have to address is like, there's actually like, there is not an anarchist economics. Like I basically have to be like, okay, here is what I see as like a pretty unobjectionable starting point for an anarchist economics. Here are a bunch of thinkers who I think like, have made arguments in this domain. Here's like my brief sketch of it, and like all of that is open to contestation, obviously. So like it is like I admit like a pretty it is like pretty ambitious, but like I really do think that like and this goes back to the whole collective action thing. I really do think that like central like Marx, as you well know, like famously said very little about like what an alternative to capitalism was supposed to look like, but he did give us like a few hints, and like a big part of it was like market relations are like driven by like individual rationality and like a narrowing of considerations, and like what he wanted. He's got this line in the section on like the commodity and its fetish or whatever, the section on commodity fetishes in the first volume of Capital, where he's like talking about how like a hypothetical communist society would be one where like the Rousseauian like individual capitalist actor, like all the characteristics of that would remain, but instead of being an individual, it would be like the community or the collective. And I think there are very good reasons that for that sort of like arrangement to happen, where you have like a collective acting as like fluidly and cohesively as an individual. I think that is like that requires like really significant technological breakthroughs that like allow us to like blur our individuality to like an unprecedented level, and that like that's like a really hard problem. So I guess my other hot take is that if you are like a serious Marxist, you should probably get into neuroscience rather than like historical materialism.
Well, I'll be very excited to see your piece when it comes out, and I hope that we can actually have an opportunity to discuss it, off the air.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. But to go back to the original piece, the
collective action problem.
Yes, exactly. So we've talked a lot about in this interview about the various problems with collective action, class-based collective action, problems of Marxism. But at the end of your piece, you do talk about that although there are trade-offs and incentive problems to both, quote, hierarchically managed mass party and, quote, a distributed network of individuals mediated by polycentric institutions, decentralized technological infrastructure and social norms that facilitate more fluid ways of organizing. However, you do ultimately conclude that, quote, bottom-up approaches that see individuals negotiate with each other instead of having changes thrust upon them by some other entity are favorable. So you do have an out. And you give a number of reasons for why that is, the preferable, mode of action. Do you think you could outline these reasons and, elaborate on them for the audience? And then additionally, do you see any specific anarchist school of thought as particularly ideal for facilitating this fluid, decentralized, polycentric, bottom-up approach?
Yeah. So I feel like this kind of goes to the whole technology thing that I was talking about earlier, and how I see technology in the sense of basically it is synonymous with capabilities and means and ways to do things, right? And so I think there's and again I kind of stole this from Gillis, but he won't mind because he doesn't think intellectual property is real. So, no. So the more ways you have of approaching a problem, the easier it is. All else being equal, the more ways you have to solve a problem, or the more ways you just have to do things, the more tractable and the more problems you can solve, right? And decentralization is important because you don't know ahead of time what problems you're going to be facing, and so the ability to reconfigure and rework things on the fly is very important in that regard. And the reason decentralization works is has to do with the whole collective the collective rationality, but not really, because it's actually individual rationality thing where the people at the top making the decisions or setting policy or whatever, they have to strip away considerations and context and whatever, and so that means there's even if you have a big organization that has a lot of on paper material resources to throw problems, they if the problem is very squirrely and messy and you can't just solve it by throwing money or bodies or whatever else at it, having decentralization means that you can find more nuanced approaches, and also you can better explore the space of possibilities, and try out lots of different things, and also respond to changes, whether it be from the problem or from the broader environment. And this is an asymmetry. This relates to a broader asymmetry that I think is really important. And I think this is another thing that I wish leftists talked about. Is I think so when you expand people's freedoms, that inherently comes with giving them more options, and that means that you have to account for that, and you have to create you have to you have to establish protocols and ways of handling negative externalities or things that might go wrong, right? So I don't know, for an example of this in practice, something like sexual liberation, right, is obviously very important, very valuable, but sexual liberation alone is woefully incomplete, and there are obviously some parts of the world where it has worked out fantastically, and women and men, or just people in relationships are very good at handling it, but in other respects, it I don't know the exact stats, but shit I don't know, coeducational universities and stuff. Obviously, women getting education is incredibly important, but negotiating the new social norms between men and women is it is just a new emergent problem that we have to deal with. and that that sort of thing is like, I think, like true for like any like really important technological like change that like really significantly gives people new options. And so decentralization is important because you can't like, there are some things like we can grasp the outline of ahead of time, but there's like always going to be like weird like second, like second, third, fourth, on and on and on, like order consequences to like the changes we make in the world. And like, I think, dealing with that is really important. And I think like one like general critique I would make of the left, like everything from, like crazy aspirational Promethean anarchists to like, just like boring, like I want healthcare plus social democrats, who like probably are going to become nationalists at some point. Like, yeah, like I think one thing they ignore is like, you have a responsibility when you increase people's freedom to like deal with the consequences, and like that is like a conservative argument, but I think it's one that we should take really seriously, because like it's really important we get this right, that we are the ones who like we don't just like, oh, you're free, okay, cool, we can just put off our hands and like let you go about it. Like we have the responsibility like to like make sure that things like actually like work out, because both because like we should care about people and like you don't want them to get hurt, but also like we also just for like the practical reason that like reaction and backlash is bad, and like we want to try and minimize that. And this goes to like the whole prefiguration point. Like one thing that like I think is absolutely fantastic about anarchists, and that I think that regardless of your like political orientation, I think that you should have respect for is like we do the fucking work of like actually trying to like test things out and like rigorously apply these like principles that we have, even though the world is like nowhere near where we want it to be. And that is I think like if I was somehow like dissuaded of anarchism tomorrow, I think like I would still have just immense respect for that, because that's like just incredibly principled and incredibly wonderful, and like it is just this source of like fucked up shit, obviously, but also like really beautiful novelty. And also it is like it lets us like identify like stress test like weak points and like identify problems ahead of time, and like come up with new like social technologies or physical technologies or whatever that allow for like much better things, and also for us to like like obviously again like the consequences of like big changes are what they are, and we can't predict everything, but we can make it like a hell of a lot we can make it like the landing like a hell of a lot gentler than like something like the fucking like forced collectivization that was like the Russian Revolution or whatever, that was just like an absolute fucking nightmare, and like I'm going to say it like has justifiably like sullied the notion of socialism. Oh, and then sorry, what schools of anarchism are like most best suited to this? I mean, again, like I think like any school that like tries to do prefiguration right is what I'm going to say. Like I don't care like what. I mean, I guess it's like. I guess, like, depending on what your definition of anarchism is, there's, like, some forms of prefiguration that I don't like, but whatever. But yeah, no, I think just, like, trying to prefigure, like, a better world in the here and now, I think just, like, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, in which case, please, like, show me, or, like, write up an experience, like write up your, do a write-up of, like, your experience, and, like, try to convince me. But like, I think that I think like, yeah, just another hot take. I think in this respect, like, anarchism is more scientific than Marxism. Because like we actually try and put things in practice. Like we actually try and like, okay, like let's actually see where this works or this breaks down. And like, I just think I think there is like some value. I mean, I'm like that's what I primarily do. I primarily try and like think about things. I'm primarily trying to like rework or like generate like new theoretical frameworks. But I think like just having like experimental data, as it were, is just like really, really invaluable. And I think that had Marxists like been more open to that in the 20th century, I think we would be living in a much better world. So yeah.
Well, I definitely agree with you in the sense of, direct action, prefigurative politics, fluidity, decentralization, polycentricity, bottom up, all of that stuff. And I think that that's why, even though we have disagreements in certain spaces, that's why we both write for Center for Stateless Society, because we both hold this great respect for, like spontaneity and decentralization and the real lived lives of people as opposed to, the party or whatever,
Yeah. I mean, like, what I really want, like, one thing that I really want is, like, and, like, I didn't realize, like, I knew you'd written, like, some things related to Marxism, but I didn't realize, like, how, seriously you took it until, I talked to you today. But, like, what I really, really want, and, like, this is sort of related, like, one thing I point out in, my collective action piece, and it's, like, a point made, like, by a bunch of people in the, public choice tradition is, it is, like, there's like this counterintuitive thing where like smaller groups can actually be more effective because like they can just like more easily like cohere around a goal and like hold each other accountable and like just get shit done. And like one thing that like I really 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 think is just like, I don't care like who you are, I think if you're like if you're approaching politics and like you're actually trying to like figure out what is true rather than like what makes you feel good or like, what like lets you, like draw people to like your side or your flag, like I will have respect for you and I will read you. I might not say nice things about you, but like I will at least have respect for you. Because I think there's a bunch of reasons to just people to like slide into like, I don't even know if it's like populist, but like basically just like treating ideas like in a very like, instrumental way. Not even like oh like like oh I'm gonna learn this so I can like do something with it. It's not even that. It's like I'm going to like my ideas, like, I'm going to use them to, like, feel better about myself, or I'm going to use them to, like, rally people to my side. And, like, that, I feel, is, like, just an incredibly ugly and destructive thing that, like, should be resisted. And I'm, like, I support anyone, and I, like, yeah, well, I'm not support, but, like, I will, like, I will be open to, like, anyone who, like, doesn't do that. And also I feel like is like, arguing in good faith and like, is actually trying to be reasonable and like empirical. And then, fancy that, the only people who like do that are like weirdo leftists and like liberals and like, everyone to the right is just like a complete trash fire. Oh, isn't that funny? Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I mean, you've given me and the audience a lot to think about, and that's about it for my, list of questions. I really appreciate the spontaneity and the discussion that we've had. Very interesting, very exciting.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that we haven't touched on in this interview that you might want to talk about before we draw things to a close?
Yeah. So I have a podcast that I haven't like released a new episode in a while called All Power to the Imagination. And I'm hopefully going to be getting another episode of that out next month as like, my life starts to cohere and get back together. There's like a bunch of stuff I want to write for C4SS. I've got this, taking on the differences between Marxists and anarchists. I've got this review of David Noble's really fantastic Forces of Production that has been in the works for a while that I want to get out. Just like honestly, actually, just like fucking like I get like relatively little feedback on like the things I write, and I would like more. So if you want to just like yell at me over Twitter about them, please, like I will indulge you. I might not be on because I like to restrict my Twitter usage to around the weekends, but like I like I like writing stuff, but like I really am interested in like having a conversation, and please reach out to me about it, because like this is like I don't know, I feel like reading a bunch of left stuff, like I feel like some of it is just like writing for the sake of writing, and like it's not it's just like repeating like what other people have already said, and sometimes there's value to that, like there's value in like popularizing ideas, but like so much of it just seems like this very like self-referential, like just like kind of intellectually toxic just malaise of just like bad practices. And I really do think there's like just an immense amount of value in just fucking like actually understanding things and actually like figuring things out and actually like being scientific in like like actual science, where like you are like just actual proper radical inquiry, where like you were trying to get to the root dynamics of things, and you were like willing to be like, all right, yep, this direction or this like area of inquiry is like kind of shit, and we should just like toss it and start over in this new direction. That's very hard to do, but like I think there's just like quite a lot of like low hanging fruit that just like weirdos on the internet, yelling at each other on Twitter and shit posting can do quite a bit to uncover. So yeah, please like actually engage with like the stuff I write and like the stuff I say, and like reach out to me and like tell me how I'm fucking wrong, and I will hear you out. Okay?
Awesome. On that note, what is the best way for listeners to follow you and your work if they found this compelling?
I have a website with Emmy called The Plausible Possible. We also haven't updated in a while. And like both of our lives doing a lot this year. So yeah, we'll eventually get back to like starting that. In fact, something we wrote together is coming out in a book by Shane Burley, I think with AK Press, on like anti-fascism. So that's like super cool, and it's kind of wild that we're gonna get like properly published in a proper outlet. Just C4SS under Frank Miroslav. Also Twitter, at mutual_aid. That's AYYDE. Yeah. Follow my girlfriend. Bad Gender Vibes at Twitter. She'll love that I give her a shout out at the end of this. Also just go follow the emancipation folks, because they're good Marxists, and I obviously, after listening to this, you should like have a pretty good grasp of where I disagree with them, but like I have to give them props, particularly Esri and Derek's Mortal Science. Like they are just like really trying to rigorously go through and interrogate Marxism as Marxists, and like I disagree with the conclusions that they come to sometimes, but like I think that what they're doing is like really genuinely impressive. So yeah, go check them out.
Fantastic. Well, Frank, thank you for coming on the Enragé.
It was my pleasure.
All right. Have a good one.